To be a champion in an awful time that we live in is quite an accomplishment. And there were quite a few champions in the WWE and in AEW in 2021. So we are going to break down all the people that held the belts and won cup. It's a different video. And see where we think the futures of these pieces of hallowed gold and leather will end up in 2022. We start with the big one, the WWE Championship. And it was Iron Drew McIntyre that started the year as the boy. And he was undone by an opportunistic Miz heading out of Elimination Chamber. Well, it was at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view where the Miz cashed in his briefcase. His dance with the stars came to an end when Miz faced Bobby Lashley eventually, and Bobby became the WWE champion for the first time in his career in this year. He also entered that very hallowed hall of being a heel WWE champion that gets to leave WrestleMania as the champ, beating Drew McIntyre at WM37. He'd weather storms as well from Goldberg and Randy Orton until another changing of the guard, another briefcase bartered big finish came in the form of a big ending from Big E, marking Big E's first run as WWE champion, one that has continued for the remainder of 2021. Now, as much fun as this new day has been with Big E as the WWE champion, I feel a prize fighter is waiting in the wings, with Kevin Owens being very much a candidate to be the guy that takes the title off E in 2022. Moving on to the Raw Women's Championship, when Asuka started the year as champion. Yeah, Asuka! Remember Asuka? It was quite a time. Asuka was having, a bit inconsistent, otherwise a fun run as the gold holder until she ran into the boulder shoulders of Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania 37. And we kind of thought this was where we would see Rhea Ripley really rise, but she found herself unable to exorcise a styling and profiling demon from her past, losing the title to Charlotte Flair. 24 hours later, though, we would see another cash-in based title win as Nikki ASH would beat Charlotte for the title on Raw the night after she got the briefcase. Nikki's run would last just a couple of weeks before Charlotte would win it back. That's another one for the title wins in Charlotte Flair's book. And she would hold on to the belt all the way up until that infamous SmackDown somewhat switcheroo that we saw. And now Charlotte Flair is the SmackDown Women's Champion as opposed to the Raw Women's Champion. Who is the Raw Women's Champion? Of course, that is Becky Lynch, as the man comes around once more, continuing the Raw Women's title reign that technically she never ended in 2020. So who calls time on big time Bex? Well, there's a few candidates here. I think Bianca Belair and Liv Morgan seem to be out front of this one because Belair has very much revenge to establish, and Liv Morgan has really shone entering the picture lately. I could see, and I wouldn't be shocked if I see both Morgan and Belair becoming belt holders in 2022. With a little sprinkling of Becky Lynch throughout the year as well. The Raw Tag Team titles. Now, the Hurt Business started the year as champions before the New Day got them off them just in time for WrestleMania season. But they wouldn't have them for too long because they would stand across the ring and stare at the lights consequently for AJ Styles and his imposing bodyguard, Omos. And we would see Omos become a sensation off the back of this win, and AJ Styles become a WWE Grand Slam champion. He's won pretty much everything in that company now. Styles and Omos ran the roost of what was a rather depleted tag division on Monday nights. They beat the Viking Raiders. They beat Jackson Riker and Elias. They beat the New Day again. It was an unlikely bromance that would see the end of their particular run, as Randy Orton and Riddle upended them. The odd couple double becoming the doubles champs. And then the draft happened, and suddenly the tag division became a little bit more interesting because we have now opponents like the Street Profits, the Mysterios, Alpha Academy, all moving to Monday Night Wrestling. And the latter, I quite like to see win the titles in 2022. I feel like they're the sort of team that have the stamina to be chased by some strong babyface competition. I would like to see that as a thing. The United States title this year, it started off in the warm embrace of Bobby Lashley. He'd lose it to Riddle. It was meant to be a belt that, in theory, would go to Keith Lee, but that didn't end up happening. And so Riddle took the belt, but he would hand the United States accolade to an Irishman by the name of Sheamus. And we'd see Sheamus do like an open challenge thing on Raw, and a lack of competition, creative, and just general interest meant that we just saw Sheamus beating up Humberto Carrillo a couple of times, and then Damian Priest turned up, broke Sheamus's nose and all Sheamus's fans' hearts when he became the US champion, and he has become an aggressive division director, holding the belt into 2022. Now, the US title's significance seems to have dwindled in years gone by, but having it around that old strapping waist of the former Archer of Infamy could add some allure to the belt once more. In terms of who takes it, if we're using the Star-Spangled Banner belt to make some stars, then why not Austin Theory? There's an idea. Austin Theory's got the approval of the head of the company, and maybe one of McMahon's machinations is to see Austin Theory become Austin in practice as United States champion. That would be all right. The WWE 24/7 Championship. Well, now it hasn't surpassed the hardcore title for total title changes or significance. It's been a busy year for the Silly Buggers title, hasn't it? We've seen title changes on the pre-show for pay-per-views. We've seen title changes during a battle royal, at a football game, during an Old Spice commercial, and at least one title change on TikTok. Among the usual suspects running around like a Benny Hill sketch for the title, we've had Pete Rosenberg and Corey Graves. We've had Doug Flutie, former NFL star. We've had Bad Bunny going for it as well. Standouts away from the regular and the irregular include Reginald, Carmella's former sommelier, has really hit some good Somali assaults in the ring. That made more sense written down. He's turned out to be a very likely, very skilled high flyer, and we were all kind of fallen a little bit in love with the work of Reginald in this year. But the year seems to be ending with Dana Brooke, who is living her best life as 24/7 champion in WWE. Now, of course, the nature of this championship means that I'm recording this, a little bit of time before the video goes out, by which point we could have seen, a dog, 17 builders and a piece of lettuce become the 24/7 champion. So it could be very out of date by now. But Dana Brooke, at time of recording, living the best life. I'm going to suggest for the 24/7 title for 2022, an actor, a backstage agent, and maybe an animal, maybe a dog, maybe a cat, maybe a goldfish winning the 24/7 title next year. Why not? Maybe somebody from the new Minions movie. Maybe Michael Hayes. Maybe Kevin Owens Daxon. Any of them will do. The WWE Women's Tag Team Championship. This is another belt which there's a lot of discussion around how much we need a belt like this. It was dominant, and I'll tell you why at the end. It was dominated, was the division, by Asuka and Charlotte Flair. They had themselves like an odd couple tag team at the start. I know, right? What a concept. Odd couple tag teams. Go figure. They would drop them to prior champions Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler at the Rumble, and then from there, Jax and Baszler would run the division. They'd defend them on Raw, on SmackDown, on NXT, and there was a groundswell of support for Tamina and Natalya, of all things, as a team, and they ended up winning the titles in May. Very inconsistent reign began there, with no clear direction, that was ended suddenly by the odd couple tag team, will they get along, of Rhea Ripley and Nikki ASH, doing it for the kids. They won the women's tag team titles. They've since dropped them to Carmella and Queen Zelina, who are at least a unit beforehand rather than like a makeshift doubles, you know? WWE sorely needs some real established women's tag teams on the main roster, because the belts could be really important if you give the time and the energy to the division. But that's been lacking for the longest of times. I mean, for the time being, whilst you are building the foundations of a women's tag division, just keep the belts on Carmella and Zelina Vega. That'd be what I would suggest for 2022. Slightly different story in NXT, where the women's tag team titles in NXT have been quite busy. So the first ever champs, Raquel Gonzalez and Dakota Kai, had them for less than a day, had them for less than an episode of NXT, because they were awarded them after winning the Women's Dusty Classic and then lost them to Ember Moon and Shotzi Blackheart that night. Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell would eventually upset Moon and Shotzi, and then we'd see the odd couple tag team of Io Shirai and Zoe Stark. Then they didn't really do many defenses. They did some fun skits where they were baffled by the idea of food. What is a sushi? I've never heard of that. That was the thing that happened. Anyway, they would lose the titles in a three-way Scareway to Hell ladder match between, they lost them in a match that featured Persia Perotto and Indy Hartwell, former NXT Women's Tag Champion, and JC Jane and Gigi Dolin of Toxic Attraction. I think Toxic Attraction are 100% the right tag team to have these belts right now. The NXT Women's Division doing a far better job than the main roster division, just simply by the fact that they've got tag teams. almost by default, they're doing a better job. And I'm happy to see Toxic Attraction on top of the tree for most of 2022. But I think next year it'd be quite nice if we finally get the opportunity for Kacy Catanzaro and Casey Carter to hold the belts. They've been one of the more consistent women's tag teams in WWE over the last couple of years. And again, that says more about the lack of than the support of. But I'd like to see them get a nod for long service. And maybe they're the ones that upset Toxic Attraction eventually. We'll stay in NXT for a little bit, actually. Let's do the North American Championship, which has got a weird hex on it, hasn't it? The North American Championship. Johnny Gargano started the year as champ. He's now gone. He dropped it to Bronson Reed in May. He's now gone. He dropped it to Isaiah Swerve Scott. He's now gone. And he dropped it to Carmelo Hayes, cashing in his breakout tournament win in the bank. Didn't realize you could do it that way, but apparently you can. So nobody who held the North American title in 2021 is with the company anymore, with the exception of the current champion. I'm up for Hayes having a nice lengthy title reign, to be honest with you. I could see someone like a Grayson Waller taking the North American title as part of his whole, I'm going to better the career of Johnny Gargano and do all the things that he did but better. I could see that being a thing. Otherwise, I think whilst we're still building NXT 2.0, let's keep the belt on Carmelo Hayes and just let him have some banger matches. That'd be fine with me. The NXT Cruiserweight Championship, Santos Escobar was the cornerstone of the division all the way to April when Kushida beat him for it. And finally we thought we're going to see Kushida doing what he does best and wrestle some banger matches. Except he lost the belt to Roderick Strong from the Diamond Mine as 2.0 was coming in place. Strong's had a lack of a real division depth going against him during this particular run, which has led to him mixing it up with the heavyweights. You know, at time of recording, we've not long had Roderick Strong and Bron Breakker have themselves a match, and we also had Joe Gacy challenge for the Cruiserweight Championship, claiming that the idea of Cruiserweight titles are what did he say? Weight shaming, wasn't it? Weight shaming. There is a concern that this title may go away altogether in 2022, and I kind of feel like that's accurate. Whether they rename the belt something else or whether they simply scrap it, I don't think the Cruiserweight division is going to last next year. I think Roderick Strong may be going down in history as the last proper Cruiserweight champion, which is sad to say, but It is what it is. The NXT Women's Championship, the top of 2021, saw Io Shirai on top of the world, putting on some quality work with Toni Storm, Mercedes Martinez, Candice LeRae, Rhea Ripley. That reign ended when the mighty Raquel Gonzalez stepped up and threw down at TakeOver Stand and Deliver. It was a very different energy with Raquel as champion, less of those sort of high-profile, like technical class matches, and it was more just about like a big challenge, a big champion, sort of Diesel-esque kind of, sort of. The reign would end when friend turned foe Dakota Kai hit Raquel Gonzalez in the back with a shovel, causing her to lose it to the leader of Toxic Attraction, Mandy Rose. And Rose has been the champion for the remainder of this year. What a weird time for the women's division in NXT. It was one of those belts that was very much being built as a work rate title. You go back to, some of the glory days of NXT where you had like Sasha Banks and Bayley headlining, and you had, people like Io Shirai more recently coming in and working some magic with that belt as well. And we're seeing Mandy Rose as the champion now, which does suggest it's going to be more storyline than the match quality going forward. And this isn't a dig. Mandy Rose has improved loads in the past few years. And again, I like Toxic Attraction as a faction. So I think that she's absolutely spot on to be the person I like the idea of them having all the belts. I think that's a nice image. There is a chance next year to make one of the youngest champion ever claims if they give the belt to Cora Jade. I'd quite like to see that, actually. That'd be a lovely little time for all involved. Let's move on to the men's NXT Championship. Another topsy-turvy year for this one. Finn Balor started the year back as champion. He had quite a set of incredible matches against the likes of Adam Cole, Pete Dunne, and Kyle O'Reilly. The hourglass ran out when Karrion Kross made his return and took the title back from Balor. Kross would hold the belt whilst in the midst of a badly orchestrated call-up to Monday Night Raw, and his rivalry with Samoa Joe would be his undoing. Joe would shock the world and become a two-time NXT champion. Joe had one match in 2021, and he won a championship in that match. Joe was forced to vacate the title due to injury, and Tommaso Ciampa would pick up where Joe left off. And now we're looking very much like, let's skip to the good part. Bron Breakker's winning the belt next year. Like, they held off early on, but Bron Breakker's getting the big belt next year, without a doubt. Ciampa I think this is his final run in NXT. I think he's going to go out as Le Champion, and his final night will be looking at the lights for Bron Breakker. I think that is probably where we're going to go. And then from there, I guess then you start building the NXT 2.0 vision around around the dog-faced Gremlins family member that we can't reference is the dog-faced Gremlins family member. Let's pop over the pond. The NXT UK Championship. Walter's 870 days as the King of the United Kingdom made him the second most dominant champion in WWE in the past few years. Admittedly, a global pandemic helped that out. His rivalry with Ilya Dragunov reached a beautiful conclusion, proving that WWE still can tell some wonderful wrestling-driven storylines. It ended at TakeOver Stand and Deliver with Dragunov submitting Walter to become the NXT UK champion. Dragunov has promised to return to America at some point with that title, suggesting maybe a merge somewhere down the line. But for now, he's plugging away. He's putting on great matches with the likes of A-Kid and Rampage Brown, the latter of which I would love to see become UK champion next year. I think having Rampage in the promotion and not making him like a title holder, batting away the competition, I think is a grave mistake that WWE should fix almost immediately. The NXT UK tag team titles haven't had much of a conversation around them this year. They haven't had a whole lot of love, but we'll give some love now. The very surprising win of Pretty Deadly, Lewis Howley and Sam Stoker, came and ended the near 2-year run of Gallus back in February. They surprised a lot of people by growing into the role of tag champs before being defeated by established big strong boys Mustache Mountain back in November. A couple of teams on the bubble to challenge them here. There's Symbiosis, which is Primate and T-Bone, managed by Eddie Dennis. D Familia, Rohan Raja and Charlie Dempsey, managed by Teoman. Even a return match with Gallus. Don't be surprised if they just carve out a legacy for Trent and Tyler and just make them hold the gold all year long. That seems quite likely. The NXT UK Women's Championship, the system here has been fairly straightforward. Two holders in 2021, Kaylee Ray rounding out 640 odd days as champ by dropping the gold to the legend that is Meiko Satomura in an absolute banger. Satomura is very much a player coach for NXT UK, and she's been the figurehead of the division whilst training those around her. There is a match on the horizon, and it may have even happened by the time you watch this, featuring Blair Davenport, the former Bay Priestley, who I can see, if they haven't done so already, becoming the UK champion of the women's division probably by, if not already, by the first quarter of 2022. I think they've got some big ideas for Blair Davenport. The NXT UK Heritage Cup, an ode to the world of sports style that was introduced post-pandemic, and the only championship in this video that isn't a belt. It's a cup. I like it. The round style wrestling roundup saw Spanish star A-Kid as the first holder of the trophy. He would then lose it on to Tyler Bate, who would in turn pass it along to Noam Dar, the current sneaky Scottish heel holder. A great concept, but doesn't have the breadth of talent that can really utilise that premise. I can see it sticking around in 2022, being used as a device for somebody like Nathan Frazier, the former Ben Carter, to get over with a new audience. But beyond there, I'm not quite sure as what you do. It's a great concept of a title. I think it just needs more of a divisional focus, maybe. Hey, when we talk of heritage, the WWE Intercontinental Championship, one of the longest running titles in the history of the whole WWE. A title held by the reigning WWE champion Big E back at the start of the year. He dropped it to Apollo Crews in a rather bizarre Nigerian drum fight at WrestleMania. And then Apollo turned back challenges from the former champ and Kevin Owens before losing it to King Nakamura in August. And then title defenses from there have been a bit few and far between. I often worry about the IC title because it needs a mental, a physical, spiritual facelift. Nakamura's a great champ, but I kind of want to see more high-profile defenses on a Friday night. I feel like when you've got Roman Reigns as the top guy consistently, you can have more fun and put more focus on the Intercontinental title on television, and I don't really feel like they've done that. I'd love to see the belt used to lift the stock of someone like Mustafa Ali on SmackDown. I think he'd be a great somebody to work with Nakamura. A back and forth with those two over the IC title would make some brilliant television. Really love to see that happen. Staying blue, the SmackDown Tag Team title, Street Profits running as the blue brand belt bearers. 8 days into the year, that is. That was until Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode solidified their new friendship and took the titles at the beginning of the year. The Dirty Dogs would rebut multiple attempts to regain the titles from the Street Profits, and they would also turn back challenges from father and son combo Rey and Dominic Mysterio, which would eventually see their undoing at WrestleMania Backlash. So we'd have the first ever father-son team in WWE as champions. It was very wholesome. Their run would end at the hands of the reunited and stronger than ever Usos at Money in the Bank on the kickoff show. And Jimmy and Jay have stood tall ever since. In the doubles department, Raw really got the thick side of the pie when the draft came around. SmackDown left with the thin end of the wedge, really. Got the Viking Raiders. They're one of the only real sort of certified tag teams on that show. WWE will, obviously apart from the Usos, WWE will have to do some real creative coupling, I think, in the next few months to rebuild that division. But in the meantime, keep the belts on the Usos. I'm happy seeing them as champs. Them and the Bloodline just dominating things, I think, is lovely. The SmackDown Women's Championship, the title that headlined Night 1 at WrestleMania 37. Sasha Banks' reign ending after an absolute belter from Bianca Belair. At night, a lack of depth in that pool saw Belair defend mainly against Bayley, mainly against Carmella, before Becky Lynch's surprise SummerSlam shellacking in under 30 seconds. And, you know, we've all had opinion on that, haven't we? Yes, we have. Becky would swap the belts with Charlotte in that sort of weird belt exchange thing that made us all question whether they were mates at all. This counts, by the way, as another reign for Charlotte Flair. Woo! Charlotte Flair, now the SmackDown Women's Champion, yet to defend her title on TV at time of recording, but held the belt during the most compelling match at Survivor Series just gone. Now, Charlotte's heading into 2022 as a very dominant champion, as per. She can expect some new challenges from the likes of Toni Storm and Shotzi, a rekindling of the fire between her and Sasha Banks. But I do feel the belt will, one way or another, continue to find its way back to the Queen. That just always does, doesn't it? We've got a record to smash, remember? Talking of records, the WWE Universal Championship, the only belt that has not changed hands in 2021, and it has been consistently in the gold-gloved mitts of Roman Reigns. And this year, wow, he's turned back challenges from Kevin Owens in a last man standing match. He's stacked Daniel Bryan and Edge at WrestleMania. He's beaten a game Cesaro. He sent Daniel Bryan to AEW. He destroyed Rey Mysterio inside a Hell in a Cell match. He stopped the homecoming goodness of John Cena. He's even picked up a win against Brock Lesnar. And all the stuff that's happened with him in between has made this one of the most successful years for Roman Reigns. Who stops him? Who does Roman lose the title to? I think that's another video in itself, isn't it? Maybe one for 2022. But challenges from the likes of Drew McIntyre and Brock Lesnar and even The Rock next year mean that the end could be nigh. However, I say no to the end being nigh. I think give him another year, you cowards. Get him all the way to WrestleMania 38 in LA. Do it there. I want to see that. Thank you very much. Over to AEW, the TNT Championship, held by Darby Allin at the start of the year, gave Miro a great bit of explosive exposure. When Miro beat him, God's favourite wrestler climbed to his very regal religious throne as the TNT champ. Cue some great promos and some aggressive title defences until he was defeated by Sammy Guevara in September. Now, Sammy has been the man ever since then. Challenges pushed back from the likes of Bobby Fish, Ethan Page, Jay Lethal and Tony Nese. The TNT title's really been put to good use this year as a gateway opportunity for talent entering the promotion. So one of the pillars of said promotion holding the title in Sammy Guevara kind of makes sense as a concept. I feel a change in the air soon. Maybe it's a belt that another pillar could have some fun with. Maybe MJF, before that inevitable world title run, could work some magic as the TNT champion, sending people packing as the gatekeeper of AEW. That could be a lot of fun. Cody actually had some fun doing something similar. Maybe a heel Cody Rhodes could be a joy in that role too. The AEW World Tag Team Championships were all about the Young Bucks until September, when the Lucha Brothers managed to halt their reign, which had seen them surviving the likes of the Inner Circle, SCU, the Varsity Blondes, and Kingston and Moxley in a belter. Lucha Brothers, rearing their heads at All Out, changed the history and took control of the division. And their battles with FTR have been a highlight of the tag division in AEW ever since. I think that the World Tag Title division has been incredibly strong in AEW, and now you've got guys like Men of the Year in the mix, Jurassic Express, who are long overdue a run, maybe a new team like the Ass Boys. There's an idea, Housen. But what if a new team was to come along and lead the way? Be interesting, wouldn't it? If only Bobby Fish had a mate that he could form a brilliant tag team with. If only Bobby Fish had a mate he could put on some brilliant matches with. Maybe matches that wouldn't drag on like some do. Drag on. The AEW Women's Championship, Hikaru Shida's title reign, whilst it lacked depth, was well received. the AEW's issues with the women's division go back to their very inception and the things that they're trying to fix right now. But whilst Hikaru Shida was doing the best with the situation that was dealt to her, we were all very much waiting for the inevitable appointment with the Doctor, and Britt Baker would become the AEW Women's Champ in May, and what a time it has been for the Doctor. DMD scoring W's over Nyla Rose, Chris Statlander, Ruby Soho, and Ty Conti. Now, I'm in no rush for Britt Baker to lose the title. I'm enjoying her run as this kind of pseudo babyface, pseudo heel champion, and with the secondary women's title, the TBS Championship, coming into play next year, there's going to be finally some depth to the women's division, and I think that was a big criticism of AEW for a while, was that lack of depth to the women's ranks, and I feel like they fixed that nicely, and this is why we're really getting a depth to the division that Shida was lacking during her title reign. And finally, we move on to the AEW World Heavyweight Championship. Omega's reign on top began in the final few weeks of 2020 and saw him taking the belt through multiple forbidden doors. He survived in every sense. He survived an exploding barbed wire death match against Jon Moxley, and then he go on to put the belt on the line against likes of Pac and Orange Cassidy, Jungle Boy, non-title, but obviously having that title represented in a match against Bryan Danielson added stock to the belt too. Christian Cage got his title opportunity as well. However, it was all about the inevitable high noon showdown with Hangman Adam Page, and a buckshot shot Bucks into Page's pocket and put a belt around his waist. And Hangman Page is closing out AEW's year as its number one. And just before we recorded this, there's the showdowns on the horizon with some big names, and there will be more in 2022. I feel like there's a lot of fun to be had with Hangman Page and Bryan Danielson going into next year. And I genuinely think, whilst I want to see Page hold the belt for a good bit of time, he deserves it. Clap, 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 clap. I think I could easily see a Bryan Danielson, a CM Punk, or even maybe an MJF being the one that takes the belt from him in 2022. So that completes our rundown, breaking down every WWE and AEW Championship and what happened in 2021. I think quite a few conversations repeated themselves in this, and there's a lot of titles, especially in WWE, that lack a lot of depth to the division. AEW has been a bit guilty of that in some places as well. Like, if you're going to have belts, you've got to have these full fields of potential foes, and many have struggled with that. I would not be averse to the idea of merging some belts next year, taking some belts away. I get why, as a brand split, from a business sense, you want a separate everything for each show. Certainly when you're on the road, to say that you've got all these title matches, I think it makes perfect sense. But there's still part of me that kind of arcs back to the early days of the WWE draft, where you had an undisputed champion and a women's champion that floated between the brands, and you could build divisions in those brands. And I kind of hope that one day we might get back to that point where we have got less belts but more depth. That would be nice on all parts. Of course, all of these are just my opinions on who should win what. Why not? Let me know in the comments down there who you think should be winning what belt and when. In particular, I'd like to know which Hollywood actor or actress you think should win the 24/7 title in 2022. Robert De Niro or not? Leave it with you. Happy New Year. Stay safe. Love you. Bye.